everyone. Today we will discuss about the norma basalis middle part. Now the middle part actually extends from the posterior border of the hard palate to the arbitrary or the imaginary line drawn from the anterior part or the anterior side of the foramen magnum. Okay, this is the middle part of the norma basalis. Now we will divide this middle part into two further parts for our convenience to study, that is the median and the lateral parts. Now first of all, the median part. Now the median part actually contains, remember, two main things, that is the posterior border of the vomer bone. This is the vomer bone, the green part is the vomer bone. Okay, and the second thing is the broad bar of bone actually formed by two main bones, that is the sphenoidal bone, posterior part of the sphenoidal bone, and the basilar part of the occipital bone. Okay, that is the median part structures, that is vomer bone and the broad bar of bone formed by the union of the two bones, that is the sphenoidal bone and the basilar part of the occipital bone. Okay, now first of all the vomer bone. Now this is the vomer bone. Now this vomer bone actually separates the two posterior nasal apertures. Now this is the vomer bone, as you can see. This is the vomer bone, the magnified view of this part. Vomer bone. Okay, now this vomer bone is actually separate the two posterior nasal aperture. This is the nasal aperture, two posterior nasal aperture. Okay, this is the half part only, or rest part is over here, nasal apertures. Now the inferior border, this is the inferior border. The inferior border of the vomer actually articulates with the bony palate, as you can see. This is the bony palate. Over here, this is the bony palate. So it actually inferiorly articulates with the bony palate, and superiorly it splits into two alas, or the ala of the vomer. Okay, which actually articulates with the rostrum of the sphenoidal bone. Okay, now let's discuss about the sphenoidal bone in short, so that you can understand some of the details of it. Now this is the anterior view of the this sphenoidal bone, and this is the posterior view of the sphenoidal bone. Now first of the anterior view. In the anterior view, this is the view that actually contains the pituitary gland, and this view actually is not visible from the norma basalis part, but the posterior view, this view is actually viewed from the norma basalis part. So first of the anterior view, this is the sella turcica, which actually accommodates or contains the pituitary gland. This is the tuberculum sella. This is the dorsum sella. This is the posterior clinoidal processes. This is the anterior clinoidal processes. Okay, this is the optical groove. Now main thing over here, this is the spine of sphenoid, or the sphenoidal spine. Now above this spine we are having foramen spinosum. Above that we will be having foramen ovale, and over here we will be having the foramen rotundum. It is just a short review about the sphenoidal bone. This is the greater wing of the sphenoid. Okay, and this is the lesser wing of sphenoid. Okay, the posterior view. Now this is the rostrum. This part is the rostrum of the sphenoidal bone. We talk about this over here, right? This ala of vomer actually splits into two parts, into the superior part of it and connected with the articulates with the rostrum of the sphenoidal bone. So this is the rostrum, okay, which articulates with the ala of the vomer. Now over here we will be having two vaginal processes, not visible over here, but we will be having two vaginal processes of the sphenoidal bone over here. This is the pterygoid process of the sphenoidal bone, which is actually having medial pterygoid and the lateral pterygoid plates. Okay, this is the greater wing, this is the lesser wing. Okay, now over here the ala of the vomer articulates with the rostrum of the sphenoidal bone. Now remember, we are having very important two canals over here, that is the palatino-vaginal canal, this, and the vomerovaginal canal. Now first of all, palatino-vaginal canal. Now this is the palatino-vaginal canal. Okay, and this is mainly formed by, as the name says, palate bone and the vaginal process of the sphenoidal bone. So as you can see, this palate bone and the vaginal process of the sphenoidal bone, this actually forms the palatino-vaginal canal. Okay, and this is the vomerovaginal canal, as the name says, formed by the union of the vomer and the vaginal process of the sphenoidal bone. So vomer and the vaginal process forms the vomerovaginal canal. So this is the easiest possible diagram and the magnified one. Now over here, as you can see, this is the pharyngeal tubercle in the median plane, in the median part, and a little anterior to the foramen magnum we are having, this is the pharyngeal tubercle. Okay, now we'll discuss about the lateral view. Now in the lateral view, we are having mainly, as you can see, this is the lateral view. Now in the lateral view, we have mainly two parts of the sphenoidal bone. That is the greater wing of the sphenoidal bone. This is the greater wing of the sphenoidal bone. This part. Okay, and the pterygoid processes. I told you what is pterygoid process. It is the this medial and the lateral pterygoid plate form the pterygoid process of the sphenoidal bone. Actually, pterygoid process is present united in the beginning, but it then splits into medial and the lateral plates, right? Over here only. Now also it is formed by temporal bone also. As you can see, this pink colored part is the temporal bone, and mainly three parts of it. That is the Petrous temporal bone, tympanic plate, and the squamous temporal bone. Remember, three parts of temporal bone: squamous temporal bone, Petrous temporal bone, and the tympanic plate. Now first of all, we'll talk about pterygoid process. Now pterygoid process actually, as you can see over here, the pterygoid process actually projects downwards from the junction of the greater wing. This is the greater wing of the sphenoid and the body of the sphenoid. It actually emerges from the between of these two things, okay, and goes downwards and laterally behind the third molar teeth. Remember, behind third molar teeth, it actually goes downward and laterally. Now inferiorly, as you can see, divides into two main processes. That is the median, two main plate. That is the median plate and the lateral plate. Okay, and these two plates actually fuse together anteriorly. In the anterior view, as you can see, these two plates are fused. But in the posterior view, these two plates actually divides. Okay, these two plates divides. Okay, and over here, as you can see, these two plates divides posteriorly by one fossa known as the pterygoid fossa. This is the pterygoid fossa over here. This is the pterygoid fossa. This medial and the lateral plate actually divides in the posterior view by fossa known as the pterygoid fossa. Now above this fossa, we have one scaphoid fossa. We'll talk about this. Now the medial pterygoid plate. Now it is actually directed backwards. It has a medial, as you can see that it has a medial and the lateral surface and a free posterior border. Why? Because anteriorly these both are fused, but posteriorly these both are divided by one triangular fossa known as the pterygoid fossa. Okay, so it has mainly free border at the back side. Now the upper end of the posterior border of this medial pterygoid plate actually encloses a triangular depression known as the scaphoid fossa. Posteriorly, in the upper part, it actually encloses a triangular depression known as the scaphoid fossa. And what is pterygoid fossa? We actually divides these two. While the medial pterygoid plate actually in its upper part actually encloses one fossa known as the scaphoid fossa. Right, now the lower end of the posterior border of the prolonged downwards, as you can see, it is prolonged downwards, and this prolonged part of the medial pterygoid plate is known as the hamulus or the pterygoid hamulus. Okay, this is the prolonged downward and laterally part of the medial pterygoid plate. Now the lateral pterygoid plate, this one, lateral pterygoid plate is directed downward and laterally, as you can see, and it has of course two surfaces, medial and the lateral surface, and a free posterior border. Now the lateral surfaces of this lateral pterygoid plate actually forms the medial wall of the infratemporal fossa, and its lateral and the medial surfaces give origin to some of the muscles. I will talk about it later. Now the posterior border of this sometimes has a projection at the middle. Okay, in the middle it is sometimes having one projection. Okay, and that projection is known as the pterygospinous process, which is project towards the spine of the sphenoid. Okay, this is the spine of sphenoid, this one. So sometimes in the middle of the lateral pterygoid plate posterior border there is a spine known as the pterygospinous process. Okay, now we'll discuss about the greater wing of the sphenoidal bone. Okay, now over here we'll specially talk about the infratemporal surface of the greater wing of the sphenoidal bone, and that infratemporal surface of this is actually pentagonal in structure. But over here, as you can see, it is very difficult to identify it as a pentagonal structure. Okay, so we'll consider over here this pentagonal structure. Okay, so it will be easier for you to consider the margins and the structures related to it. So now the pentagonal infratemporal surface of the greater wing of the sphenoid is actually having 5 margins: anterior, anteromedial, anterolateral, posteromedial, and the posterolateral. Now anterior margin actually forms the posterior border of the infraorbital fissure. Anterolateral actually forms the infratemporal crest. Anteromedial actually continues with the pterygoid process and the body of the sphenoidal bone. Posteromedial articulates with the petrous temporal bone and the posterolateral articulates with the squamous temporal bone. Now this posteromedial and the posterolateral actually articulates together and form a spine, and that spine we all know is the sphenoidal spine or the spine of the sphenoid bone. Okay, now we'll discuss about the actually some of the foramens actually are present in this part, right? Now they are mainly 3 to 4. Now first of all, the foramen ovale. This is the foramen ovale. Okay, this is the oval shape and large in structure, large in shape. It is situated posterolaterally to the upper end of the posterior border of the lateral pterygoid plate. Okay, over here this is actually the anterior view of the sphenoidal bone. So of course over here the medial and the lateral pterygoid plates would be fused, right? While in the posterior view they would have separated by a triangular fossa known as the pterygoid fossa, right? But over here it is fused. But just remember that this foramen ovale is actually present at the posterior border of the lateral pterygoid plate, and this is the foramen spinosum near to the spine of sphenoid. And sometimes there is the emissary sphenoidal foramen or the foramen of Vesalius. Remember, emissary sphenoidal foramen or the foramen of Vesalius. Now this foramen of Vesalius is actually present or situated between the foramen ovale. This is the foramen ovale, between the foramen ovale and the scaphoid fossa. Now the scaphoid fossa is mainly seen in the posterior view, okay, where it is mainly enclosed by the upper part of the medial pterygoid plate. So it is actually present, this foramen of Vesalius is actually present in between the foramen ovale and the scaphoid fossa, and internally it actually opens between the two foramens. Remember, foramen ovale and the foramen spinosum. Internally it opens in between these two, but actually outside it is actually present between the foramen ovale and the scaphoid fossa. Now at times there is canaliculus innominatus also situated between the foramen ovale and the foramen spinosum, right? Now the spine of the sphenoid may be sharply pointed or blunt. Okay, this is spine of the sphenoid bone. Now remember one term, sulcus tubae. Sulcus tubae is actually the groove between the posteromedial margin of the greater wing of the sphenoid. This is the greater wing of the sphenoid. So posteromedial margin. So of course this is the posteromedial margin to consider over here, because it is difficult to consider in this diagram. So you won't be able to understand that. So just imagine this is the posteromedial surface. So the sulcus tubae is the groove between the posteromedial margin of the greater wing of the sphenoid and the petrous temporal bone. Okay, somewhere over here with the petrous temporal bone. Okay, now just look at this diagram. This over here, this is the petrous temporal bone. This is the temporal pink part temporal bone, and this is the petrous temporal bone. So between the petrous temporal bone and the this posteromedial margin of the pentagonal infratemporal surface of the greater wing of the sphenoid is the sulcus tubae. Now what is the importance of this? Now this sulcus tubae actually lodges the cartilaginous part of the auditory tube. Now we'll talk about the temporal part. Okay, if you remember, I told you that the lateral part of this NORMA basalis is actually having a temporal bone part also. That is the petrous temporal bone, the tympanic part of the temporal bone, and the squamous part of the temporal bone. So now first of all we'll talk about the petrous temporal bone. So this is the petrous temporal bone. Okay, triangular in shape. Now it lies mainly between the greater wing of the sphenoid. This is the greater wing of the sphenoid. Between the greater wing of the sphenoid and the basic occiput. This is the basic occiput. So between these two we are having the petrous temporal bone. Now over here, as you can see, the apex is actually perforated by the upper end of the carotid canal. This is the carotid canal. This is the carotid canal. So its apex, it is made triangular in structure. So its apex is actually perforated by the carotid canal, or is actually having the upper end of the carotid canal, and this petrous temporal bone is separated from the mainly the body of the sphenoid bone by the foramen lacerum. So carotid canal at its apex, and foramen lacerum actually divides the sphenoidal bone and the petrous temporal bone from each other. Now this carotid canal actually runs forward and medially within the this petrous temporal bone. It is visible, right? It actually runs forward and medially. This is the foramen lacerum. It is actually short wide canal, okay, and separates the petrous temporal bone and the body of the sphenoidal bone. Now part of the petrous temporal bone called the tegmen tympani is present in the middle cranial fossa. We will discuss about the middle cranial fossa in our further videos. Now the next part is the tympanic part or the tympanic plate of the temporal bone. Now this actually present in between the petrous temporal bone and the squamous part of the temporal bone. Now the squamous part of the temporal bone. Now this part actually, the entire part of the actually forms the TMJ or the temporomandibular joint, and a small posterolateral part of the roof of the infratemporal fossa. So remember, the squamous temporal bone actually forms the temporomandibular joint and the small posterolateral part of the roof of the infratemporal fossa. Now the muscle attachment on the basic occiput. Now we'll particularly discuss about the particular place where the particular muscles are attached. Now first we have the basic occiput. This is the basic occiput or the basilar part of the occipital bone. Now over here, the attachment on the inferior surface of the basic occiput are first of all the superior constrictor muscle. The superior constrictor muscle is actually inserted at the this pharyngeal tubercle over here. Okay, it actually gives place to the attachment of the raphe. Okay, and this raphe provides the attachment of the superior constrictor muscle of the pharynx. And next is the longus capitatus. Longus capitatus muscle is actually inserted laterally to the pharyngeal tubercle. Means on the pharyngeal tubercle by the raphe, superior constrictor laterally to this longus capitatus. And then the rectus capitatus anterior is inserted a little posterior and medial to the hypoglossal canal. Hypoglossal canal will be somewhere here. Okay, in front of this occipital condyle. This is the occipital condyles. So in front of this there will be hypoglossal canal. Okay, so it is actually rectus capitatus anterior actually inserted posterior and medial to this hypoglossal canal. Now the medial pterygoid attachments. This is the medial pterygoid. Now first of all, pharyngobasilar fascia. It is mainly attached at the this medial pterygoid plate at the processus tuberous. Now what is this? It is also known as the pterygospinous process and is actually present as a triangular projection in between this whole length of this medial pterygoid plate. We were similar thing we were having in the lateral pterygoid plate also, pterygospinous process. Same way in the medial pterygoid plate also, we will be having pterygospinous process in the middle of the posterior border of the medial pterygoid plate. And this processus tuberous actually supports the medial end of the cartilaginous part of the auditory tube. Now the lower part of the posterior border and the pterygoid hamulus. The pterygoid hamulus is this, the lower part, spinous part of the medial pterygoid plate actually give attachment or the origin to the superior constrictor of the pharynx. Okay, and the pterygomandibular raphe is actually attached to the pterygoid hamulus only at one end to the mandible. Okay, from this to the mandible behind the third molar tooth at the other end. From here to the mandible behind the third molar tooth. Now the lateral pterygoid plate. Now the lateral pterygoid plate is this one, and the lateral surface of this actually give origin to the larger lower head of the lateral pterygoid muscle. Okay, and its medial surface give origin to the deep head of the medial pterygoid. So its lateral surface give origin to the lateral pterygoid and medial surface to the medial pterygoid. Okay. Now over here I told you that the lower head of the lateral pterygoid is actually attached at the lateral surface of this, but the upper head of the lateral pterygoid is actually attached to the infratemporal surface of the greater wing of the sphenoidal bone. Now the next is spine of the sphenoid. Now it is related laterally to the auriculotemporal nerve. First of all, this is the spine of sphenoid. Okay, and laterally it is related to the auriculotemporal nerve and medially to the chorda tympani and the auditory tube. Now its tip actually provides attachment to mainly, remember that, sphenomandibular ligament, anterior ligament of the malleus and the pterygospinous ligament. Remember three ligament: sphenomandibular ligament, anterior ligament of malleus and pterygospinous ligament, and the anterior aspect of this actually give attachment to the one main muscle known as the tensor veli palatini and one more muscle, tensor tympani. The petrous temporal bone. Now the petrous temporal bone actually give attachment to the origin to the levator veli palatini muscle. Structure passing through the foramens. First of all, the palatino-vaginal canal. It mainly transmits the pharyngeal branch from the pterygopalatine ganglion and a small pharyngeal branch of the maxillary artery. So pharyngeal branch of this and pharyngeal branch of maxillary artery also. Now the vomerovaginal canal, if patent, transmit the branches of the pharyngeal branch of the pterygopalatine ganglion. Okay, and the vessels also. Now the foramen ovale. Foramen ovale actually transmits the mandibular nerve, accessory meningeal artery, lesser petrosal nerve, emissary vein, and also it sometimes passes anterior trunk of middle meningeal vein. Occasionally it also passes the middle meningeal vein, anterior trunk. Okay, just for mnemonics, you can remember the mnemonics MALE, male, meningeal nerve, accessory meningeal artery, lesser petrosal nerve, and the emissary vein. Now from the foramen spinosum, mainly three vessels of the nerve passes. That is the middle meningeal artery, middle meningeal vein, and the nervus spinosus. Okay, remember the mnemonics by 3M. Middle meningeal artery. This nervus spinosus is also known as the meningeal branch of the mandibular nerve. Okay, so again M you can remember over here. And the posterior trunk of the middle meningeal vein. So 3M. Meningeal artery, meningeal branch of the middle of the mandibular nerve or the nervus spinosus, and the posterior trunk of the middle meningeal vein. Now from the foramen of Vesalius mainly, or we can say the emissary sphenoidal foramen, mainly transmit the emissary vein which will connect the cavernous sinus with the pterygoid plexus of the vein. Now the canaliculus innominatus actually, this actually passes the lesser petrosal nerve. Okay, and if this canaliculus innominatus is present, okay, then this lesser petrosal nerve, okay, will be transmitted from this only. It won't transmit from the foramen ovale. If you remember, I told that in the foramen ovale, this lesser petrosal nerve is passed. But if this canaliculus innominatus is present, it will pass the lesser petrosal nerve in place of the foramen ovale. Now the carotid canal, it mainly transmits the internal carotid artery and the venous and the sympathetic plexus around the artery. Now this is the foramen lacerum. Okay, during the life, the lower part of the foramen is actually filled with the cartilage. As you can see, this is the cartilage. It's filled with the cartilage only. And so no significant structure actually passes through the whole length of the canal except for one main artery known as the meningeal branch of the ascending pharyngeal artery. Only this passes. Rest, no, there is no passage of any of the vessels from this because there is cartilage present over here. And a small emissary vein from the cavernous sinus also. So mainly two things: meningeal branch of the ascending pharyngeal artery and a small emissary vein from the cavernous sinus. However, the upper part of the foramen is traversed by, as you can see, this internal carotid artery with venous and the sympathetic plexus. Now in the anterior part of the foramen over here somewhere, the greater petrosal nerve, this, and the deep petrosal nerve from the sympathetic plexus, greater petrosal nerve and the deep petrosal nerve, they both will unite in the anterior of this foramen lacerum and will form the nerve of pterygoid canal, or known as the Vidian's nerve. Now this nerve of pterygoid canal will actually pass in the pterygoid canal only, also known as the Vidian's nerve, now which leaves the foramen by entering the pterygoid canal in the anterior wall of the foramen lacerum. Now there is one more fissure in this middle part of the norma basalis, that is the petrotympanic fissure between the petrous temporal bone and the tympanic part of the temporal bone. Now this mainly transmits the chorda tympani nerve, anterior ligament of malleus, and the anterior tympanic artery. So this was all about the middle part of the norma basalis. Hope you understood well. Thank you so much.